Okay, everyone, welcome to Beyond WWDC. What's working, what's rough, and what IT teams should be paying attention to as the fall release gets closer. Just as a housekeeping note, this is going to be recorded. We will stop the recording at the end and leave a little bit of time for questions outside of the recording. So please just hold those questions to the end. With that, I'd like to do an introduction. Tom Bridge, I don't think you need the introduction, but please enlighten everyone if they don't know you.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Tom Bridge. I'm the CTO at IMP Productions here in Washington, D.C. We have famous music venues like the 930 Club. And then I'm also the one of the hosts for the Mac Admins podcast. So, and long-term IT veteran, been doing this a long time, especially in the Apple space.
Thank you, Tom. I'm David Starr, handling partners at Workbrew. I'm your host and moderator for some of Tom's brilliance today. You know, a few months back, we had a handful of some of the leading members of the Mac admin community join the Workbrew webinar series to talk about all the great things that Apple announced at WWDC. And if we think about those sort of high-level topics, it's Apple's services like Apple Business, device management, app management, identity integration, and a whole collection of updates for education-specific features. We're now, as of just a few days ago, Tom, I think, we're at beta
hmm
5, and as history would tell us, we're probably 2, 3, 4 weeks away from a final release of sort of the iOS, macOS 27 releases. And so I think it's a great point to check in. We kind of got an overview of what's new. If you haven't seen that, go check out that webinar, which is also at Workbrew's website. But I think it's a great point to check in and think about how has testing been going, how to deal with the testing situations. Let's start there. How does one even begin with all the things that have changed? 5 betas in. How do people handle testing like this, Tom? How do you think about
Well,
testing this stuff?
how I think about testing really comes down to, how much of my job would be really terrible if this got released onto new hardware that I had to support immediately. And so the question is like, what parts of this work and what parts of this don't work yet are super important. And in terms of like where all the changes are, I think that Apple does a really good job putting out sessions, for Worldwide Developers Conference. And DubDub has a whole series of videos that are available in the developer app. And that developer app runs on your Apple TV, it runs on your Mac, it runs on your iPhone, all of those places. And those are all places where you can kind of get caught up on what Apple's been doing. The biggest part of this for IT administrators is Apple's Appleseed for IT program, which you can access directly with any managed Apple account at beta.apple.com. And that's the first thing to do is just like, hey, grab a machine. Maybe it's your daily driver, maybe it's not. Depends at this point, like how critical you think you are. I strongly recommend, going and doing this on a machine that you're going to use more than once. And just install the betas and see what happens. Like literally just see what happens. I think that we have had a really good beta year so far in that most of the things that have caused problems have mostly not been catastrophic ones. I think that there have definitely been a couple of things with platform single sign-on that have been maybe a little less enjoyable. If that's part of your, day to day, if you're living in a platform single sign-on world, maybe don't test this on your personal machine just yet. But there's a lot of really great materials out there through that Appleseed program to get started. And Apple puts out really good release notes now with every release, especially for those of you out there using different device management solutions. I was really psyched to see that, device management companies are now submitting, hey, we support this. And Apple is saying, yes, these people support these new functionalities and these new configurations in the release notes that drop for every beta. I think I've seen Adigy's name, I've seen Miru's name, I've seen Jamp's name, I've seen, a lot of different companies have essentially put in the effort to say, yep, we support this. You can try this out using beta functionality of their device management service. So, as you go through the process, it's not just, hey, does this work? It's also, what does my deployment workflow look like? What happens when I take a new machine that's had the latest version of the beta put on it? What happens when I take it from a never booted state all the way through to the end user's desktop? Does the authenticated automatic device enrollment process work? Does my workflow kick off that provisions new software to my machines work? And really, this is just a place where you've just got to spend a lot of time with the operating system. And I know it can be tricky to carve stuff out, especially I know here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're getting ready for school to start again. For those folks who are in education or may have had their year start already,
Mhm.
it's really tricky to balance testing against that kind of space. So, this is a good time to go and test, especially the earlier in the beta process, the more likely it is that your feedback gets to Apple in time for them to be able to fix it for the release of the software, likely intended for about 4 to 6 weeks from now. I would fully expect that Golden Gate, which is macOS 27, will ship somewhere around the equinox this year, which is the late part of September. So, and I would expect that most organizations, at least as of today, could probably ship this in some format for end users, or at least no longer run into like catastrophic failure. I think that there are definitely some challenges in the current betas, but you've got to figure out what those look like for your environment.
One of the things I always feel overwhelmed about, with especially each year, more and more seemingly investment in the enterprise feature set, is how does one begin to even take stock of all the things that have changed, or even what are the things that you're looking to not have regressed? And so when you think about a rubric here, Apple provides something, right? There's an Appleseed
Yep.
for IT test plan that's also available at beta.apple.com as part of the download suite when you download the software. Is that enough? Are there other things that people are using in the open source community, or that they've sort of put out there for people to work with? How do people actually mechanically go through the requirement set?
Yeah. And so, this varies by environment. You have to decide as an IT manager or an IT field technician or as a CTO what actually is critical use for your employees. So in our environment, Chrome's got to work. In our environment, we're a monkey shop for software updates. I need Monkey to work. I need Monkey to be able to download, software from our repo and to push it out to individual workstations and successfully get through the update process. Every environment is different. Some organizations use DLP tools. Some people use, security tools like CrowdStrike or other tools like that. I think that your tooling as your organization is really going to set your priorities in terms of what can I ship versus what can I not ship. If it is a requirement that every machine in your organization be fully locked down with a DLP tool and a, endpoint security framework tool, then you're going to need to make sure that number one, those tools install, that if they are installed, they still work after upgrade, and that your rules are being respected by the operating system. Because there are oftentimes changes in endpoint security framework and in the various DLP system extensions that may negatively affect your tools. I know that some tools with network extensions really struggled in a previous year's beta cycle. And it's better to have that feedback, not just for Apple, but for your partners who you hope are testing in production against production builds. That part is so crucial because you need to know what your exposure is. If somebody downloads it on day one, because we all know that there's a 90-day extension policy that basically says, hey, for
Deferral, sure,
three
yeah.
months, I can defer that operating system update. But you've also got to decide, like, am I going to? Am I going to defer this update and avoid? And I mean, because Apple has always said that the only version of the operating system that receives all of the security patches is the most recent version. And starting sometime in September, that's going to be macOS 27 and not macOS 26. And so being ready for that and being ready to balance that and having the internal discussions over, am I, missing something here? Or am I putting my fleet at risk by not installing this? So you've got to figure out what your risk calculation is. I recently moved back to using Jira, and I no longer have panic responses when I see Jira, which is a pleasant experience now. But like we've got a whole set of cards for our team to test with. Like, hey, here's your test plan. Here's the Apple test plan. There's a lot of things in there that are super important. You also want to make sure that like, hey, file vault disk encryption works appropriately, and the keys escrow to your management solution. That's a super important spot. Activation lock is super important if you are using devices that you don't necessarily own, but you are managing them in a way that is similar to how you do. You want to make sure that you've got those activation lock tokens in play, ready to go in case the user requests them. And then, I think that there's a lot that happens during the beta testing process that's really just about your organization and then how you provide that feedback out, because that's the really important part of it. It's not just testing. The testing is important. You cannot be guaranteed that Apple's going to fix your problem if you never tell them about it. And if you never submit feedback on a behavior in the operating system, in the beta version of the operating system that gets back to Apple, I mean, you've got to provide as much information as you possibly can in those kind of feedbacks, because the feedback assistant is how Apple learns how you think about things. And this is one of those apps that's out there, and you register feedback, and I will admit, it is a little bit like shouting into the void. You're not always going to hear the answer, but if you don't submit, I mean, if you don't ask, you don't get it. But I think the other important part of that is if you've got a problem with a third party tool, an endpoint security framework tool, a DLP program, a common app like Chrome or even Microsoft Office, that you're communicating your feedback to them. Now, I also think it's really important that you level set in terms of what kind of response you're going to get when you submit to a third party. When you are trying to use a non-production version of the operating system with a production build of an external tool, that's not how they want you to hold it. And so as a result, what you've got to figure
Who's
out,
they? Who's they in that situation? The vendor?
the vendor, like
Yeah,
you're using it in an unsupported fashion,
sure.
and like you can't ask for the same level of support that you would ask for in production builds. But you can say, hey, I think you have a problem. Here's the behavior that I am experiencing. And really, the way that I've always thought about feedback is that there was an old guideline from Apple on how you submit feedback. And the guideline really comes down to you hit an unexplained behavior. And what happens next is, up to you in terms of like how you phrase this, because I think the most open way for phrasing things comes down to what happened? What was my experience? Followed by what did I expect to have happen? And then you need to also explain what the priority is to the end user product, the vendor product manager, because that's who's helping prioritize a lot of these things is the product team. Because if it's like, hey, this is a deployment blocker for my organization, this is causing me to be in an insecure posture. I cannot deploy your tool in this case. That needs to be clearly, escalated to the company in the way in which they will understand it and say, hey, look, I have a problem. You have 4 months to fix this because the end of the year, if we're assuming a posture that releases around September 20th, give or take, I think that puts your deferral into late December. You're going to want to make sure that it's fixed by the time because that's the thing. As admins, we lose the ability to defer on day 91. And so end
Yeah.
users can just install the new version of the operating system, even if maybe you don't necessarily want them to.
Yeah,
But
and
they
you
can't.
mentioned something else about defer earlier that is, I think it's an interesting point is that we may not want to defer, as I think what you said, right? You may not want that
Yeah.
have that behavior, and I think that the other thing that's a reality is that by deferring a new major OS release like this, you're also sort of implicitly saying we're making a moratorium on new hardware purchases because more often than not, the exciting new products that come out in the fall will only ship with that OS and the new OS of the 27-year
Yep.
releases. And there is no option to run the prior OS on those devices. And that's sort of the way it's always been. And so it's not just the security, it's sort of, well, what's your buying habit, right? Do you really expect all of your new iPhone or iPad purchases or whatever the product is to happen in early 2027? That may not make any sense fiscally potentially. So it's a really interesting conundrum of why you need to be testing now.
Or, I mean, alternatively, if you're in that position when new things are coming out and you feel like you may need them, I mean, I certainly would encourage people to go and look at the lead times on the Apple stores right now.
Hmm.
And I will say that I've had a harder time getting some kinds of hardware this summer than at any other point since before 2015.
Yeah.
So we are at a, the supply crunch, thanks to Rampocalypse, has certainly made things hard. And so
Yeah.
if you are going to be in a place where you do need to deploy new hardware between now and December, and you are planning to delay the installation of macOS 27, buy your hardware now, friends. Like go
Yeah.
out to Apple and get that done now. Get the financial
Stockpile.
approvals now before. And I mean, it's not really a stock because like nobody's got budget these days for equipment that they're not going to use in a short order. But if you're
Fair.
short equipment, now's the time to buy and make those plans based on what's available now, not what could be available at some future time, if the stars align and the boats are shipping correctly. So, we think about, where that, you know, where we might go. I think that that's definitely a part of the planning. I certainly think that, Armin's point in the chat here is super salient, which is, hey, middle of September is where we have seen the last couple releases. Labor Day falls late this year, and that's the only reason that I'm thinking week of the 20th right now. The Apple tends to do their, announcements in that after Labor Day, after in the States, or at least parts of the States, the kids go back to school. And so as a result, if we see an announcement, on the following week, which would be the 14th or the 15th of September, usually you've got about a week to get ready for final release day. Final release day could then be the 21st, or it could also be the 14th. So you have to be ready for a moving target at this point, and that's one of the real challenges that you're facing.
Tom, you mentioned, how important it is to write the feedback to Apple. If you don't participate in this feedback program, you're sort of left to the devices of whatever happens.
Yep.
We're at beta 5. Is it too late? Is all hope lost this late in the summer when we're just 3 weeks out?
It is never too late for feedback to be addressed.
Okay.
I mean, if getting your feedback addressed by Apple is a lot like planting a tree. The best time for that feedback was a year ago. The second best time is right now.
Sure.
And I think that I've heard a stat from various people at Apple that has said, "Hey, look, if we got feedback in beta 1, there was like a 60 to 80% chance it got addressed by the shipping release. If you wait till now, beta 5, that drops down to about 40%. So I was going to say, if you've got a clear deployment blocker in your environment, mark it as such. Make it very clear in the feedback that you're giving back to Apple. This is a deployment blocker for us. That represents this many workstations on this many physical devices, and we will stop buying hardware until such time as we are confident in our ability to deploy the new version of the OS. Those are the kind of
Yeah.
things you can say to maybe provide the impact statement that's going to be helpful. Is that impact statement guaranteed to work? My friend, it is not, because you do
No.
not know what the other competing elements are with regards to feedback. And
And
it's been
engineering
very interesting.
engineering
And,
limitations of
and
what, yeah, yeah, sure.
correct. So I was going to say, as always, earlier is better with feedback. And that's a very important part of the Apple cycle. I've got, I think, 6 feedbacks in on 27, and at least 2 of them that have already been addressed. So some of them were low-hanging fruit. That's the other thing that you have to do during the beta test cycle. Don't assume that other people are going to submit the same feedback as you, which is to say, if you experience a bug, submit a bug. Every little bit counts. And like I submitted an AirDrop bug literally yesterday because I was having trouble sending AirDrop between 2 laptops, one on 27, one on 26. And, we realized that it was only above a certain size. And so I was like, I just happened to have a 22 gig IPSW file and I was trying to send to another machine. And sure enough, total failure after about 3 minutes. Whereas most of the other smaller files were succeeding appropriately. So spending a little bit of time regressing on your own is a good way to provide extra guidance.
Awesome. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the content areas, right? The Apple Business changes, device management, a whole lot of stuff there around declaration support, app management. So allow and deny binaries, I think was sort of probably the biggest sort of feature in that area. And for app management, potentially it falls under device management as well, I suppose. Identity integration, education specific features in general, Tom, like, you could pick on anything that you're either directly familiar with, or maybe what you're hearing as someone who runs a podcast and an IT, responsibility shop. day to day. What are you hearing are the areas that people are providing feedback, things that are going great, things that aren't going great?
Sure. And I think that anytime you're going to change the end user's experience, um, and going to maybe poke the end user to do some things, I think that providing change feedback is super important. Especially if it's not behaving as you think it needs to, or in those other cases, as other things are operating. I think that there's a big change this year in the privacy preferences policy control, regarding accessibility. And Apple's warning messages for, hey, we have allow listed the accessibility setting for this application. That dialogue has gotten, well, it's gotten a little scary because essentially when you allow list the accessibility privacy preferences policy control key for a given application, I mean, that does provide a huge amount of access to the system because the accessibility frameworks that Apple provides are meant for device controls. They are meant for physical hardware. They are meant for accessibility aids that can read your screen and do screen reading techniques. But they also capture all of your keyboard input. And let's just say that any sufficiently well-developed piece of DLP software is indistinguishable from malware. It's just malware that's employed in the use of the corporation's needs. And that means that it can record the screen. It means that it captures your keyboard input. It means that it captures, in some cases, disk changes and things along those lines. And those messages to the end user are now going to be such that it's very clear that there is a privacy exchange that can be possible as part of this. So those messages are going to get a lot more dire. And users, as end users, may now be able to turn those settings off again, which may interfere with your DLP, which may interfere with your security environment. That's going to be something that you're going to want to evaluate in terms of like what's going on. Why are they using the accessibility framework for this, as opposed to using some of the other tools that don't require those same sets of feedbacks? So, or same sets of APIs, rather. So when you're writing feedback, think about it from the perspective of the IT manager who's trying to maintain a good experience for the end users. That's certainly one of the guiding principles that I take as we do our testing here. Is like, hey, is this message going to like unnerve somebody? And so like we install TeamViewer. TeamViewer is a remote support solution that helps me control computers in the field with user consent. And so recognizing that there's going to be, a bad experience, or at least an experience that may cause your users a little bit of panic or a little bit of, guarded behavior, I think is going to be important knowing as you go through this testing. If those dialogues are deal breakers for you, you've got to either go back to your partner that is using the accessibility framework and say, hey, are there other APIs you could use instead that don't require me giving this very, very deep tool full access over my system? And if your organization decides you suck it up and deal, which they may, you've got to make some choices as IT administrators in terms of like how that's going to shake out. So I think that that's a big part of providing good feedback. That's one area where I've heard a lot of upset in some of the Mac admins because, hey, I've got this Wacom tablet that's really an accessibility device, and now I'm turning this on in such a way that standard users can turn it off. And that's going to cause us to have to go to the devices more often. Maybe there's another way for us to handle this. We need to provide feedback to Apple so that Apple can guide us on what feedback we need to give to Wacom, because I think that's another important part of this. So privacy preferences, policy control changes are certainly a part of it. I know that there's another layer of that, which is right now when you give out camera permission, or when you try to, Apple's changed the experience of those prompts that happen on the first launch of an application that says, hey, look, you need to give Bluetooth access and network access and camera access and microphone access. You can now do that if you have the MDM user channel active for every user in your environment. You can provide a new experience, and that experience is my company. So if I'm at Pretendco says, hey, these are the settings you're about to get asked for. It's a one-stop shop, and that's a huge usability improvement. But it also requires that your end users are MDM capable and they're actually set up with the user channel correctly. So that's some homework that I'll give to everybody here. If you want to adopt that new behavior that you saw in Worldwide Developers Conference, What's New in Managing Apple Devices, you have to deploy that in such a way that there's an end user channel. And not every device management service creates that by default. Not every device management service will update an existing deployment to that. So you've got some pathways that you're going to have to consider. Hey, is this a place where I need to update documentation? Is this a place where I need to prepare for a longer tail with updating documentation? And so that's an important thing to start experimenting with, especially because, you may want to provide feedback to Apple that, hey, maybe I don't want this in the user channel. Maybe this belongs in the device channel. And this should be a device setting, not necessarily a user setting. So that's something, there's good feedback about that's been made already. Make more, especially throw your thumb on the scale. And, this is one place where I really want to shout out one of the Appleseed channels on the Mac Admin Slack, which is running a dashboard or a Slack canvas of all of the open feedback. And it's a good way for you to basically say, me too, I'm having this problem also, because it's giving you some pre-built forms that says, hey, I'm having this problem. The master feedback item is this feedback. And, I think that this would also affect our organization, and here's why. And here's how big we are. So linking and chaining feedback assistance, because none of us is as smart as all of us. And certainly that allows us to team up. It's not against Apple. We're all fighting for the same users, but it certainly can feel that way.
Fantastic. A couple comments in the chat, including from Armin. Just I think maybe as a note on, is it too late?
Never too late.
It's never too late for sure, but also just maybe more practically, the
Mm-hmm.
.1 and .2 releases we'll probably see historically within the first 30 and 60 days of the OS release.
Correct.
And so I think the point that I would make, in tandem with yours, is that that's well within the deferral period, that if you have a deal breaker, you have a deferral window that you can then sort of roll out within the deferral window if you put that feedback potentially in immediately, right? And so the growing a tree analogy, agree completely. But we definitely have some windows, fast follows before the end of the year.
That's
I want
right.
to shift back. I want to shift back to something else that, it's actually probably not the first time you and I have even talked about this. And as someone that I know that you're really close to on the product management side, a different part of your career, and for myself as an Intune and platform SSO user on at least one of my Macs for work, tell me a little bit about your assessment of platform SSO. You made a comment early on, like, hey, are we there yet? Obviously, we're as close as we've ever been. Presumably, I don't think we've had a major step backwards. But tell me a little bit more about what you're seeing in this cycle.
Well, platform SSO remains a place where I keep wanting this to be the thing that I need. And I have two things working against me in my current environment. One, we're Google customers. And so Google Workspace really doesn't have a native platform single sign-on plugin. Yes, I know that you can do this with Xcreds and do some other things along those lines. I think that we're starting to see some better experiences to come there. I was really excited to see them this year basically open this up to any OpenID Connect flow. And so that if you have an existing OpenID Connect flow that you can hook this up to, you can do those kind of authentications directly in a browser window, or directly in a small, very limited browser window at both the login screen and the screen lock, as well as at the uh, what's it called, the main lock screen, and that these have network access, and so that essentially you can provide a live fire OpenID connector that's available there if your IDP is playing ball. And so this is one thing where if you really want the OpenID Connect flows, talk to your friends at Okta, talk to your friends at JumpCloud, at OneLogin, and all of the other identity, providers that are out there that can do this. My hope is that Google can get to that point as well, where this is, something that's going to be supported as part of that process. You'll be able to register a specific flow for this kind of thing, and then your authentication is direct at that point, and it's handled through the Okta, and it's gives you the benefit of platform single sign-on has always been not just password sync, because I don't think that's an actual benefit. I think at this point in life, that's kind of a harm. But what you get is a phishing resistant credential at all of the places where your identity works, because you have a secure enclave backed key that is meant for your authentication into all of those web services. your organization is all in on the cloud and is spending all of their time authenticating against an identity provider for all of those services, if you're registered with all of the various tools like Office and Google Workspace, and your special solutions for your environment, Canva, Adobe, you can use that secure backed key. That is awesome. That is a huge boost in your organization's security, and it's something that we should all be working towards. So from that perspective, I really do think that there's a lot to like in this year's platform single sign-on to environment. It just, once again, it requires third parties to help with that process. And that's not always the place where Apple shines in terms of their developer relations. I understand that this year there's been a lot more outreach from the product management and the developer relations teams at Apple into the enterprise spaces. I know that recently there was an IT summit in Cupertino at the Apple Developer Center, where a lot of the device management services and the identity management services, and that they did that earlier this year. And so having that kind of information out early gives product managers and product directors at those companies an early window into, why do I want to prioritize my roadmap for this Apple thing that I can't control? And the answer is, for my organization's security is a better selling point for the environment and a better user experience. I don't think we're all the way to the great user experience yet. I think that there's room to grow there. I think that there's still too many points at which you're needing a password during enrollment, or it's not full support for passkeys everywhere yet. I certainly think that, Intune admins have certainly seen some of the challenges of moving towards the V2 workflow. I don't think Okta's even made it towards the V2 workflow. I still think they're hanging out a little bit on the line between the original version of platform single sign-on and the second generation that we got last year. So I understand that there are beta programs at Okta for those organizations that want to do secure enclave keys, and to do that safely without a password synchronization. And I think that that's exciting. So are we headed in the right direction? Absolutely. Are we in the promised land yet? My friend, we are not. And we are getting closer, but I'm wondering if we will ever get there.
I'm wondering if I will ever understand if we get there, partially because my day to day is not predicated on enrolling net new devices into platform SSO. So I don't necessarily see the flows. We have it working. Shout out to Tim, one of my former colleagues, for getting it stood up in this environment, and it has just continued to work thanks to Intune and probably 2 OS releases now for macOS. But I haven't really dabbled much because it's just fine in my world. So I really appreciate that perspective. It's very helpful.
Yep.
I think we'd be remiss not to at least touch on some of the AI focus, the Apple Intelligence focus, the Siri focus, if you will, of this year's cycle. And maybe it's not down the middle of what IT needs to think about, but I also think it's a big enough piece of how all of us are thinking about technology, that experience for an IT's user base is a really important thing to understand. And my read, I'd love your read, is that this is a pretty big change. I think it's better. And I say that sort of hesitantly because in some ways I say maybe I think it's better in exchange for the Spotlight experience that I was used to using. But what do you make of the Siri and AI Apple Intelligence efforts this cycle? How's it
For
going in
sure.
your experience, and what does it mean for IT?
Yeah, I think that this year's experience is super interesting because it does represent and I believe what Mike Rockwell called we tore it down to the studs, or down to the ground even, right? They didn't even leave the old walls in place. That this is a new version of Siri. And my experiences this year have been hit and miss, but mostly hit. And the experience that I've had with them as an end user of the service have been quite impressive. The best example was, I knew that I was going to dinner before a concert down at the wharf. I didn't know where I was going, and it wasn't in my calendar, so apparently I had missed setting up a calendar invite for it. I had no idea where that information was, and I was like, "Well, let's throw this at the canister lady in my phone and see what happens." Because I don't want to
Right.
use the wake word on the recording, let anybody, do those kind
Right.
of things. But it was, hey, wake word. where am I meeting Tony for dinner tonight? Like that was the entirety of the question. And not only did it find the right answer, where it found the answer was super interesting. It was a image inside an iMessage thread. And so it was just a, screenshot of an open table reservation that was like you're meeting Tony and Melissa at, Mi Vida down at the wharf at 6:30. And it got the location right, it got the time right, it got the people right, it figured out those contexts on the fly. The things that I'm really excited for how this comes together are a better experience for search on the Mac because I think that Apple Mail has been the place where mail goes to die, which is to say it's hidden in there and you can't find it. The native search tools that are in Apple Mail, that are in Calendar, that are, part of the core operating system have been so bad for so long that like I think that anything, literally anything would be better. And my experience so far is that it is better, but still not what I would consider to be good. And some examples. So if you search directly in the mail application, you are still using the old search and the old search indices. And so your muscle memory takes you there, not to command space and then start typing in Siri. And that is, I think, the thing that's going to take the most to get used to as we go through this process. Certainly has taken me a lot of muscle memory to get used to. And people aren't going to understand that the search results are different because you're expecting that when you click on the search window up at the top, that you get a very different experience. As opposed to invoking the new Siri AI functionality. I think that that may be a misstep on Apple's part and not fixing it in all of the places. But where you do need to get more information from your context and having it understand who you are and what you're doing, this is a huge net positive. And where it does work, where am I going to dinner with Tony? It becomes a recall engine on a scale that I just don't think was easily possible before. And it's certainly a place where I have been experimenting a lot with Claude at work and have Claude connected to our project management system, our email system, our Slack and messaging solutions, as well as a couple of MCPs I can talk about. It's been life changing. And so having a single context aware search engine that can go through all of the things on your phone, oh my gosh, there is so much in that future that I am really excited about. So play with it, use it. I did run into an odd behavior. I was doing some math, and I'm so used to command space, start typing math problem,
Same,
and having it
same.
be instantaneous,
Yep.
as opposed to, oh crap, no, this is going through the Siri engine, and who knows where it's going from there. Um, we thankfully did get a lot better management controls, or I mean, more of them anyway, in the device management service updates for macOS 27 and iOS 27. There are more keys here, so if your organization has an AI policy that you need to abide by, you are going to be in control of that, at least in terms of Apple's Siri. You can make it do the rules that you want, and if you can't, please file feedback because that's something you likely are not alone out there, and Apple needs to be aware of those different policies. So as you run into this, I think that there's a lot of experiences that are going to be good to have as part of this. And this is something where you should be doing some testing in terms of like, hey, can I find the things I need to find? Do I have this connected to all of the applications? Because the other part of this is that there's a back-end layer of this that's on app developers to implement, and that's doing things with app intents and providing more information there. So I'm very hopeful that, being able to provide good app intents for company applications is going to lead to a massive adoption in Siri usage, and it's good enough. And the other nice thing is it's private, right? Like that utilization is private. It is not fed back into retraining. It is not fed back into other things like that. It is a single and private solution for you. Apple can't touch those queries. It won't even know what they are. And so, let alone the answers that come with them. And so, knowing that there are contexts that are going to be available only to the end user is super exciting. And I think that that is a net positive piece here. So I'm really excited by the idea of more AI that is context aware and can run locally on your Mac as well as local or in Apple's private cloud compute environments, which are secure and private. So I'm excited for that to get to be an interesting place. And I do definitely find the chat history that's available in Siri to be very, very interesting. I'm gonna say I haven't gone deep on it yet, mostly because I'm so spoiled by Claude at work, and
Sure.
I spend most of my time in that context, where that's where I'm putting things together. And I definitely think that there's going to be more to go with there.
Tom, you actually jostled sort of a what would actually happen kind of question. And this we've had this concept of managed accounts now for probably darn near a decade, if not longer. And if you were to remove a managed account from a device, either because you specifically remove the account or the device is no longer under management, it'd be really interesting to see how new Siri would lobotomize itself of just that context. Or it
Yes.
does it? How does it? I mean, in theory,
I mean,
that's
the
that's
way
how it
it's been
should work.
explained, the way that
Yeah.
it's been explained in the past is that the context that is available, Apple figures out what information it needs. The
Hmm.
Siri construct reads your query and figures out like, hey, this is a query that I'm trying to run against the local environment, and essentially that context is just not available anymore. And so managed application being suddenly removed because the device is no longer under management, because that's all tied together with the device management service. I think
Sure.
that there's a lot of really positive effects of that because the Siri indices that get built are local to the device. And when you remove an application, you remove its index. And
Fascinating.
so that lobotomization process is pretty straightforward. And it's certainly not. I definitely, from the way that they have talked about it, the intent gives an application like almost like an MCP server on the
Right.
device,
Right.
and so that you can ask the device, "Hey, I need this information from the app," and it gives you the format by which you can retrieve it. My understanding is that the way that that works is if that app is not there, the intent is not registered anymore, and so as a result, the data store is not available and it can't be queried.
Makes sense. I'll make one observation. I'm not sure it's specific to either 27 or IT, but watching the AI implementation inside of Keynote and adding some of those AI features outside of the OS, inside of individual applications, whether free or premium. And I thought it was interesting two things. One is that in the midst of all the open AI stuff going on with Apple right now, is that back end image system inside of Keynote switched to Google the Gemini at some point just in the past couple of weeks. Was OpenAI a few months ago, and now it is not. And so that just sort of happened transparently. But I was also just really impressed with what it's like to have that built into an application that you're using to create. And it was fascinating to say, like, yeah, I need an image of a managed service provider, a group of people that are just unboxing their first Macs, and like, boom, you have sort of a royalty free kind of thing that you can just drop in there as a placeholder. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, for sure. And, I mean, I will fully admit that I have been using the clanker to produce more things lately. And some of the times it's dumb. Hey, I need a wallpaper screen for this iPad that's not even really work related, but it just needs to be,
Sure.
hey, this has to come back to me.
Yep.
Bring this IP, bring this network, bring this iPad back. And like being able to do that on the fly and have it look nice is kind of a benefit. Now, it's very
Beautiful.
clearly AI built and it shows that to other people, but like in some
Right.
cases, I just need the work of the graphic design to be done. It's not meant to be creative expression. It's not meant to be a replacement for our creative team. I want to free them up for the things that really matter, not for some silly IT use.
All right, Tom, this has been an awesome session. I think if I were to summarize some key takeaways, right, it's never too late. Get your feedback in, not just to Apple, but to the vendors.
Test,
Um,
test, test.
Test, test, test. Figure out what your rubric is, and do all you can to avoid the dreaded 90-day deferral, and try to figure out your path to adoption sooner rather than later. So, I cannot thank you enough. I think at this point we can wrap.